Okay, good morning. As you know, we've been discussing the book of Esther for the last 2 weeks, last two sermons, and hopefully by now you've done your homework and you've read the book, so you won't be lost this morning. Now, this morning we are going to go over a few points, more than a few. We're going to go over several very quickly. So we were looking at, for the last 2 weeks, about the canonicity of Esther and how it's been questioned, why it's been questioned. As a matter of fact, like I said, I noticed that it was taken out of the Keys to the Kingdom Bible, and some people asked about that. So I brought up the arguments presented against Esther. And one of the other ones that we did mention that I haven't gone over yet was historians and scholars, they have a problem with the fact that Esther, the wives that Xerxes has versus what we see in history are different. So that's a big contention. Those don't align. So according to Herodotus, Xerxes' wife at the time in which Esther takes place is Amestris, wife of Xerxes. Okay, that's what history tells us, secular history. And of course, the biblical text refers to Xerxes' first wife as Vashti. And then remember, he sends her away after she refused to show up at the party, remember? And then second, he marries Esther. Okay, and remember Esther had a year-long worth of pampering before she got to be queen. Neither Vashti nor Esther now match the name of Amestris. So we have an obvious dilemma. Either the Bible is in error or extra biblical histories are in error. All right, and my problem is always this. Now I do have the history of Herodotus. Actually, I have it in one volume. I have it in two as well. The problem I have is that extra biblical texts such as these are always held in higher esteem than the biblical records. You see? So it's always Herodotus that's right or correct, and it's the Bible that's wrong in secular history. Okay, now I always question that. So historians like Herodotus, Origen, Josephus, they're always viewed as immutable. But the Bible is rarely mentioned as the ultimate history book, and if it is, it's used selectively for convenience, usually, when you see it mentioned, if it's ever mentioned. And it's never held to be consistent, and it's never held to be a reliable source, not as reliable as Greek historians. So I always have a problem with that. And we know that the historians, we know they have a few errors, yet they're still held higher than biblical texts. And when it comes to Amestris, however, this Herodotus is 100% right at all times, according to scholars, and the Bible's wrong. You see? So I think, honestly, it's suspicious, if not dishonest, right, academically. Now, if we look at the histories, it's very likely that Amestris and Vashti are the same character, however. So that does line up. So we have Herodotus saying that Xerxes is the wife, the Bible saying Xerxes' first wife is Vashti. If we compare the histories from the Bible to the Greek historians, they do seem to fit. Now, there's no concrete evidence that this is true, but it seems likely. So Vashti is an actual historical figure. We're fairly certain. It's Esther that we question, right? Now, the second point I can make about Xerxes' wives is that just because the Greek histories don't mention Esther doesn't mean she didn't exist, okay? So that's another case of an argument from silence, which is, like I said, not a position to be in. And just because a Greek historian like Herodotus doesn't mention a queen or her actions doesn't mean that that queen or that those people or those events didn't occur at all. You see? So that's an argument from silence. So it doesn't really doesn't come from a strong point for me. And that can also be said about how they view the absence of secular history about Mordecai and Haman as well. Remember we mentioned that since they don't show up in archaeological evidence or anything like that, they must be fictional people. But again, argument from silence. Now, both the names of Mordecai and Esther are actually derived from, now remember, they were given those names a common thing in captivity. Think of Rakshak and Beni, right? From the Babylonian captivity. That was their Babylonian names, not their Hebrew names. I don't recall their Hebrew names. Right. So, I watch a lot of VeggieTales. But anyway, Mordecai and Esther, now their names they're derived from the Persian gods that would be Marduk and Ishtar. Okay, Mordecai, Marduk, Esther, Ishtar. Okay, so that's where they came from. Common thing when people are taken captivity. Now, there was a discovery of an ancient cuneiform text, however, that does refer to a high-ranking official in Xerxes' court named Marduka. Now, whether or not this Marduka is Mordecai is unclear, but I don't think it should be dismissed out of hand. Okay, so anyway, not concrete evidence that there is a real Mordecai in secular history, but we do have this one cuneiform tablet that says that there was someone named Marduka who was a high-ranking official in the court of Xerxes. Could be Mordecai. And if you read what Mordecai's job was, he was a high-ranking official. It does fit. And being that Mordecai is found in the root Marduka, which was the chief god of the Persians, Marduk. All right? Anyway, now among other arguments we had about Esther very quickly were the improbable events or historical inaccuracies I mentioned. One that's always brought up is the extreme height of the gallows that Haman supposedly constructed in a few hours. Remember that? They were, yet you'll have a problem if you're thinking about gallows in this way. Right? So they thought he made these huge gallows like this. And we think gallows. Now you say he constructed gallows of 50 cubits, which is approximately 75 feet, right? But what does history say? I have Rawlinson's 7 Great Monarchies. It's 7. This is a 3-volume set. It would be the 7 of Chaldea, Assyria, Babylon, Media, Persia, Parthia, and the new Persian Empire. That's the 7 he writes about in these books. Okay, so I'm going to read about what Rawlinson says about Persia. This will be the 5th monarchy. The treatment of prisoners in Persia. The Persians readily gave quarter to the enemy who asked it, and generally treated their prisoners of war with much kindness. All right? Rebels were, of course, liable to any punishment which the king might think it right to inflict upon them, and there were occasions after a revolt when sentences of extreme rigor were passed upon the persons considered to have been most at fault. According to Herodotus, 3,000 Babylonians were crucified by the order of Darius to punish their revolt from him. And though this is probably an exaggeration, it is certain that sometimes where an example was thought to be required, the Persians put to death not only the leader of a rebellion, but a number of his chief adherents. Crucifixion, or at any rate impalement of some sort, was such cases the ordinary punishment. And then of course it goes on to say, sometimes among the rebels, it says that they were branded and mutilated at some points too. And if you think about the rebels that were found at Thermopylae from the, remember the 300? Okay, Alexander found some of the rebels, and they were indeed branded by the Persians. So that's true. So, according to history, the Persians hung or impaled people on pikes, poles. And so we have ancient, you see, hung, impaled upon a spike, right? So, and you'll find this also, if you go through any library book. I have here The World of the Persians. I read that. So flip through this one. Same accounts. So a Persian gallows isn't necessarily something we think of. It's good, bad, the ugly, by the way. Persian gallows are merely a spike upon which a person was hung or impaled. And I know that's Assyria, but they were their neighbors, and that's close enough. This is the Persian version, but over there, that'd be west of Persia, they also did the same thing. So that's a Persian gallows. So, according to the histories then, the Persian gallows were sometimes just a tree that had been modified to either hang or impale a criminal or an enemy. So it is likely then Haman's gallows were one of these, which could have easily been constructed or prepared quickly, right? And it could have been 75 feet, easily, right? Not a big deal. So the Bible isn't really wrong or exaggerating again. So don't hold that against Esther. And a historical inaccuracy that Esther supposedly brings forth is stating that a Persian king could not change a law once made. Okay, and the historians have a big problem with that. They say that there is no such rule. The reason they say that is because they've never found external evidence outside of the Bible of a rule that says a Persian king cannot change a law once it's been made. You remember that's the reason Esther had to go to him. Is that he didn't just reverse it, he supplemented that law with something else, which said what? The Judeans could defend themselves against the incoming attacks, right? That was the deal. Because you thought, well, why didn't he just, nix the order? Just veto it. But he couldn't do that. And here's the verse in question. Esther 1:19 states, "If it pleases the king, let there go a royal commandment from him, and let it be written among the laws that the Persians and the Medes, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, that it be not altered, that Vashti come no more before the king Ahasuerus, and the king gave her a royal state than another that is better than she." So here, Persians and Medes, a law once made cannot be altered. Esther 8:8, "Write you also for the Jews," Judeans, "as it liketh you in the king's name, and seal it with the ring. For the writing which is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring may no man reverse." So there's a case where they say, well, this law in Persia doesn't exist. It's only ever mentioned in the Bible when it comes to the Persians. Scholars have a problem with that. But I don't, because we have a second witness in the Bible. Daniel 6:8. Now, who was Daniel under? Persia, right? "Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing that it be not changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which altereth not." So you see, Daniel lived in a country and it was the same thing. Now, this was the one about the lion's den, right? This is the one. They're coming up to the king and they're saying this to the king, because once you make the law, it cannot be changed. That's what trapped Daniel. Second witness. So we have 4 in the Bible. "Then they came near," remember the advisors? And Daniel 6:12, "and spake before the king concerning the king's decree. Hast thou not signed a decree that every man that shall ask a petition of any god or man within 30 days, save of thee, O king, shall be cast in the den of lions? The king answered and said, The thing is true, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which altereth not." So you cannot change laws once they've been made by the king. I have 4 witnesses in the Bible that says this happened in the Persian Empire. Secular history states it never happened. Personally, those are enough witnesses to say it's in the Bible, it's true. Okay, and we know every page, every word in the Bible is true. So yes, Media and Persia had a law that said once the king made a law, it could not be changed. Fine. That doesn't do anything to Esther, does it? I didn't think so. All right. So we have a few witnesses here. Now, finally, in the case of satrapies, you all are familiar with what a satrap is, right? Satrap, satrapies, we know all those, right? And, all right. And Pastor Reed's going to help you out. Satrap, a governor of the province of the ancient Median and Persian empires, be the first Persian empire. And a satrapy, the territory governed by a satrap, which is who? The governor. The satrap governs the satrapy. A satrapy is governed by a satrap, just the way the Persians did it. All right? Now, Herodotus claims there's only 20 satrapies in Persia, whereas Esther 1:1 says, "And now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, that this is Ahasuerus which reigned from India even unto Ethiopia, over 127 provinces." So we've got Herodotus saying, no, there's 20 satrapies in Persia, and then Esther says there's 127 provinces or satrapies. Right? So here's an example of what the satrapies would have looked like. Now, this is more than the Persian Empire encompassed at the time, but this is just an example. And there's Media, and Parthia and Babylonia. So see, each was divided. You remember in Greece, they had city-states governed by their own peoples? Kind of like that. Almost like a serfdom, right? Okay, so anyway, Bactria, interesting. Anyway, pay attention because Herodotus said, no, Persia had 20. Esther's saying 127, and there's more than 20 there. I've already counted them. So now, the Israelites lived in these places during their captivities, recall? This map should be familiar. What's it look like to you? That one? Yeah. Yep. Here, Media, Persia. And then just as the Bible says, just as history records, there we go. Okay? Just thought that is the history of our people. Right there. Now, for you etymologists out there, satrap comes from this cuneiform word, which I'm sure you all know. That is kashathrapa. Protector of the province, Latin, satrapies. So a satrap is the protector of the province. Okay, that's all it means. That's it. It comes from the ancient Persian cuneiform for the provinces in Persia. Now, the difference in Herodotus and Esther, to me, the satrapies number is not a big deal. The reason for this is because empires such as this were often divided into subunits, yet they were still listed as 20 major units. Not a problem. So for all we know, the 20 in Persia were divided into some 127 subunits. Right? Not a big deal. Or maybe they listed 20 and then 107 they counted with them. Who knows? So anyway, that's not that big a deal. Herodotus could have just been referring to the larger units. Not a big deal. Doesn't hurt Esther. No linguistic gymnastics needed. None, right? Okay. Now, if in defense of Esther, this is Pastor Reed's version, it does have, when you get to Esther, it has remarkable accuracies when it comes to Persian courts, law, and Persian customs and way of life. The book of Esther, scholars agree, is a historical document in that manner, that it's only someone who lived in Persia at the time and experienced these things as a first-hand account would have had these kind of details. Next to the archaeological record, it's the most accurate. So Esther's spot on with that. Now we're going to look at the bigger picture of Esther, okay? So we've done Esther. Thought, okay, we've gone over the arguments. A lot of them are just nitpicky. A lot of them are arguments from silence, and I just shelved those. So let's go to Exodus 17. Exodus 17, verse 8 through 16. I read, Then came Amalek and fought with Israel and Rephidim. And Moses said unto Joshua, Choose us out men, and go fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand. So Joshua did as Moses said to him, and fought with Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And it came to pass that when Moses held up his hand, that Israel prevailed. And when he let down his hands, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands were heavy. And they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat thereon. And Aaron and Hur stayed up his hands, the one on the one side and the other on the other side. And his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. And Joshua discomfited Amalek with the people with the edge of the sword. And the Lord said unto Moses, Write this for a memorial in a book, and rehearse it in the ears of Joshua. For I will utterly put out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. And Moses built an altar and called the name of it Jehovah Nissi. For he said, Because the Lord has sworn that the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. Now keep this in mind. So, Amalek, we have a war here. Now this is not just some desert skirmish, as you can tell. This is very important because for some reason, when Amalek lifted his sword against the Israel people, he'd bared his sword against the throne of God. That's what he'd done. And there's a banner here that the altar says that God is the banner of Israel in war. Okay? So this is what's going on. Now Amalek, who's this? Genesis 36:12 says, and Timnah was concubine to Eliphaz, Esau's son, and she bare to Eliphaz Amalek. These were the sons of Adah, Esau's wife. Okay, so Amalek is the bastard descendant then of Esau. Okay? All right. Now, we know that Esau hated his brother Jacob, and he was well aware of the birthright that said that the nation of Israel was chosen by God for special purposes. Right? We know that because even with tears, he couldn't get it back, right? That was what special purposes was Israel to God? Kings and priests, right? All right, now from what we read in Exodus 17, this Exodus 17 was the first physical conflict between Esau and Jacob. Amalek versus Israel. Amalek being Esau. Keep this in mind. Now, like I said, so Amalek drew his sword against Israel, and in so doing drew his sword against God, God's people. Okay. Now, let's go to Numbers 24:2. I'm going to put these up on the board because we're going to be going quickly. Numbers 24:2. And Balaam lifted up his eyes, and he saw Israel abiding in their tents according to their tribes, and the Spirit of God came upon him. So we know what's about to happen to Balaam, right? He's going to try to speak a curse and instead bless Israel. Pay attention to these prophecies. They are Bible-wide. They have influences in end time Israel as well. How goodly are thy tents, O Jacob, and thy tabernacles, O Israel. There's a blessing. Next, 24:7. He shall pour the water out of his buckets, and his seed shall be in many waters, and his king shall be higher than Agag, and his kingdom shall be exalted. That's what Balaam says about Israel, right? Who is Agag? 1 Samuel 15:7. And Saul smote the Amalekites from Havilah until thou comest to Shur, that is, over against Egypt. And he took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive, and utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. Saul was not to do that, was he? That was one of the... Samuel came and corrected him on that. As a matter of fact, Samuel the high priest killed that king with Saul's own sword to put evil from among Israel, right? But anyway, the Agag is that guy. And here, according to 1 Samuel, Agag is the king of the Amalekites. Who? Esau. Okay. So, and in the Bible, you'll see Agag and Amalekite used interchangeably to denote those people. Okay, which happens often in the Bible. If you're from Agag, then you are an Amalekite, and vice versa. Think of the Midianites. Now the names change. Now back to Numbers 24:20. And when he, Balaam, looked on Amalek, he took up a parable and said, Amalek was the first of the nations, but his latter end shall be that he perish forever. First of the nations to do what? Raise the sword against Israel. So Balaam says in a prophecy, parable, and said Amalek was the first of the nations to do battle with Israel, physical battle, an aggression, but his, Amalek of course, latter end shall be that he perish forever. So Amalekites are to be wiped out one day, according to the prophecy of Balaam. Right? Okay. Let's go to Deuteronomy 25. We'll read 17 through 19. Deuteronomy 25:17. Remember what Amalek did unto thee by the way, when ye come forth out of Egypt, how he met thee by the way, and smote the hindmost of thee, even all that were feeble behind thee, when thou wast faint and weary, and feared not God. Therefore it shall be, when the Lord thy God has given thee rest from all thine enemies round about in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance to possess it, that thou shalt blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven, thou shalt not forget it. Now that's the same people, Amalek, remember, who attacked Israel on their way. And that God came down very hard on Amalek for that. And here, according to what Balaam said, and here again, blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven, thou shalt not forget it. So apparently Amalek is to be wiped out for aggression against Israel. Once again. All right. Judges 6:33. Then all the Midianites and the Amalekites and the children of the east were gathered together and went over and pitched in the valley of Jezreel. Okay, you know what's going to happen. This is Gideon's men. Remember? Story of Gideon. Oreb, he slew those men there. Okay. Judges 7:21 and 22. And they stood every man in his place round about the camp, and all the host ran and cried and fled. And the 300 blew the trumpets of the Lord, set every man's sword against his fellow, even throughout all the host. And the host, the alliances against Israel, including Amalekites, fled to Bethshittah and Zerath, and to the border of Abimelech Holah unto Tabath. So not all were killed, they fled. Remember when Gideon surrounded them and they busted the lanterns open and screamed and trumpets, terrified them? We know the story, right? Okay. Now, there's Gideon having run-ins with the Amalekites. David had a problem with them too. 1 Samuel 27:8 and 9. And David and his men went up and invaded the Geshurites and the Gezrites and the Amalekites. For those nations were of the old inhabitants of the land, as thou goest ashore, even unto the land of Egypt. And David smote the land, and left neither man nor woman alive, and took away the sheep, and the oxen, and the asses, and the camels, and the apparel, and returned and came to Achish. Remember? David goes and attacks those men. Now, 1 Samuel 30, we'll read a little bit more about that. So David had a run-in with the Amalekites. 1 Samuel 30. Verse 11, I read, and they found an Egyptian in the field, and brought him to David, and gave him bread, and he did eat. And, just a second. Hang on just a second. 1 Samuel 30. Oh, I turned the wrong. I'm in 2 Samuel. Okay. Oh, I was right. And they found an Egyptian in the field, and David gave him bread and made him drink water, and they gave him a piece of the kegs and 2 clusters of raisins. I'm going to skip until we get to verse 18. So I'll be in 1 Samuel 30, verse 18. That's where I'm going to start. I'm sorry, I started too early. And David recovered all that the Amalekites had carried away, and David rescued his 2 wives, and there was nothing lacking to them, neither small nor great, neither sons nor daughters, neither spoil nor anything that they had taken to them. David had recovered all. So the Amalekites apparently stole some things from David. He went back and smote them, according to verse 17, from the twilight even until the evening of the next day, and there not escaped not a man of them, save 400 young men, which rode upon camels and fled. So David had a problem with the Amalekites. He went after him. He got his stuff back, but some got away, you see. And there is an interesting little military matter sitting over here. If you look at verse 22, verse 21, and David came to the 200 men, which were so faint that they could not follow David, whom they made him also abide at the brook of Besor, and they went forth to meet David, and to meet the people that were with him. And when David came near the people, he saluted them. Then all answered of the wicked men and men of Belial, of those who went with David, they said, because they not went with us, we will not give them aught of the spoil that we have recovered, save to every man his wife and his children, that they may lead them away and depart. Then said David, ye shall not do so, my brethren, with that which the Lord has given us, who has preserved us and delivered us from the company that came against us into our hand. For who will hearken unto you in this matter? But as his part is that goeth down to the battle, so shall his part be that tarrieth by the stuff. They shall part alike. And so it was from that day forward that he made a statute and an ordinance for Israel unto this day. So it seems, according to King David, if you were in the service, you'll remember that the division of spoils not only goes to those who were on the front line, but the spoils also go to the men who were in the rear with the gear. Right? Interesting military matter. That actually has something to do with spoils. When you get to battles in the Bible, that's why the spoils are not touched. That's why. And if you remember, Saul had a little incursion, and he told his men they couldn't eat because it'd waste too much time. Remember that? And then he does this whole sacrifice thing, which would have taken more time than just eating. And then he says, anybody that eats is going to get killed. His son eats some honey on the way, right? Remember that? But remember, the thing about the spoils there is Saul hadn't let his men eat, and they've been chasing these guys all through the night. By the time they got into the land of the Philistines, they saw the spoils and jumped on it and forgot all about the mission, right? That's another thing about the spoils, you see. So Saul made a few mistakes in that regard. Anyway, so we have David. We see that he has run-ins with the Amalekites as well. Now, if we go to Psalm 83, David wrote a psalm later. Now, pay attention to Psalm 83. This is something that applies to latter-day Israel as well. And there's a composite of many, many prophecies, major and minor, found in this one psalm. It's a short psalm of only 18 verses, which I'll read this morning. Psalm 83. Listen to these verses and remember that you are in time Israel in the land today, the land of promise. Keep not thou silence, O God, hold not thy peace, and be not still, O God, for lo, thy enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. Lifted up the head, you should be familiar with the tares at the end of the age, right? The enemies. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and have consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent, they are confederate against thee, the tabernacles of Edom, and the Ishmaelites of Moab, and the Hagrites, Gebal, Ammon, and Amalek. There's Amalek once again. The Philistines with the inhabitants of Tyre, Asher, or Asher, that'd be Assyria. It also is joined with them. They have holpen the children of Lot. Okay, so here we see a gathering of nations in a confederacy against Israel. We have that today. So what? They may blot out the name of Israel. And of course, you'll see listed among these is Esau's progeny. Do unto them as unto the Midianites, as to Sisera, as to Jabin, as to the brook of Kishon. We know what happened there, right? Elijah and the priests, he slew every one of them. Which perished at Endor, they became as dung for the earth. Make their nobles like Oreb, there's Gideon, and like Zeb, yea, all their princes as Zebah and as Zamunah, who said, let us take to ourselves the houses of God in our possession. O my God, make them like a wheel, and as stubble before the wind. Stubble before the wind should remind you of the prophecies in Amos and Obadiah about the latter end of the house of Esau, right? The house of Joseph aflame. And as the fire burneth the wood, and as the flame setteth the mountains on fire, so persecute them with thy tempest, and make them afraid of thy storm. That should bring to mind the book of Hosea about whirlwinds, right? Fill their faces with shame, and they may seek thy name, O Lord. That's a turning to God at the end of the age. That should remind you of the book of Joel. Let them be confounded and troubled forever. Yea, let them be put to shame and perish, that men may know that thou, whose name alone is Jehovah, art the most high all over the earth. Psalm 83 is an amazing prophecy written after David had run into the Amalekites. Right? Now, this certainly applies to national Israel today. And you notice that the nations listed here have formed an alliance against God's people. Same as today. And like I said, notice among the nations is Ishmael, Moab, the illegitimate daughter of, or son of Lot and his oldest daughter, correct? We have the Philistines and Amalek listed right there. And who is Amalek? A branch of the house of Esau, right? Okay. So this, what David's talking about here, this is an ancient war that started between Jacob and Esau. What are we talking about? We're talking about the age-old struggle for the birthright all the way through. Genesis 27:41 says, and Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing wherewith his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, the days of mourning for my father at hand, then I will slay my brother Jacob. Right? There's the struggle for the birthright. And it's still happening today. Do we not have nations that have formed a confederacy against God's people, Israel? Of course we do. You can read all about it in the major and minor prophets. Now, like I said, keep in mind that the Amalekites are descendants of Esau, Edom, or the inhabitants of Mount Seir. Right? Okay. Amalek versus Israel, then, is nothing more than the age-old war or this conflict right here. Okay? Beginning to see it? And you're probably like, well, Reed, that's great and all, but what does this have to do with the book of Esther? Right? Didn't we start there? Well, let's go to Esther and figure it out. Okay. We're going to go to Esther 3:1. And after these things did King Ahasuerus promote Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and set him a seat above the princes that were with him. So he's a descendant of Agag, Haman. Esther 3:10. And the king took his ring from his hand and gave it unto Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the Judeans' enemy. Esther 7:6. And Esther said, the adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. Haman is our enemy. Esther 8:3. And Esther spake yet again before the king, and fell down at his feet, and besought him with tears to put away his mischief of Haman the Agagite, and his device that he had devised against the Jews, Judeans. 8:5, and said, if it please the king, if I have found favor in his sight, that the things seem right before the king, and I will be pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Judeans, which are in all the king's provinces. Esther 9:10. Then the 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Judeans, slew they, but on the spoil they laid not their hands. 9:24. Because Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Judeans, had devised against the Judeans to destroy them, and had cast pur, that is the lot, to consume and to destroy them. Now, notice anything. Did you notice that before when you read Esther? Haman is the descendant of Amalek, an age-long enemy of God's people. The main villain of the story, right? Now, both the Judeans and the remnant of Amalek, remember, were both captives of the Babylonian Empire, and then later of the Persian Empire. Haman, you know the story, he attempted to kill the Judeans. He even paid 10,000 talents of silver to secure the death sentence. Remember, he paid that to the royal treasury to kill the Judeans. Now we know that Esther's pleas to the kings were more successful than the money, right? And then the house of Haman was destroyed. And when Haman saw that Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence, then was Haman full of wrath, Esther 3:5. And he thought scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had showed him the people of Mordecai. Wherefore Haman sought to destroy all the Judeans that were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, even the people of Mordecai. Mordecai is who? A Benjamite, right? Esther 6:13. And Haman told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends everything that had befallen him. Then said his wise men and Zeresh's wife unto him, if Mordecai be of the seed of the Judeans, before whom thou hast begun to fall, thou shalt not prevail against him, but shalt surely fall before him. Right? A little prophecy there. Esther 9. Thus the Judeans smote all their enemies with the stroke of the sword, and slaughter and destruction, and did what they would have unto those that hated them. This is the last mention of the Amalekites in history. Balaam's prophecy. Balaam's prophecy. The last mention of Amalekites in history. Esther then, Esther 9, the book of Esther, is the last chapter of Amalek versus Israel. In order to view Esther as canon, though, you would have to properly identify Esau and properly identify God's people. You must also know how Bible prophecy fits the entire Bible narrative throughout. You have to be able to follow prophecy through scriptures, just as we did this morning, right? Now, the Bible does not employ senseless or useless repetition. And Esther told us over and over and over again who Haman was. He was from Agag, the Amalekites of Mount Seir, an age-old enemy of Israel. Now, the story is finished in Esther that we started. It runs all the way through Israel and Judah. It runs all the way through their captivities, right? It passes through many of the earlier books of the Bible, just like we did this morning. And that prophecy between Balaam and this verse here is 1,000 years. 1,000 years. That's the final mention of the Amalekites. The ones that started the skirmish in the desert, remember? So, you have to know that the Bible prophecy, Bible timelines, and then of course, this story that ends in Esther is an age-long story that's been written about throughout the previous books of the Bible, previous histories of peoples, including Moab, Ammon, Midian, Edom, and Israel and Judah. You have to know those things and identify those people, just as we did this morning. Now, when it comes to Esther, I hold it in high regard because of Bible prophecy. Bible prophecy. The arguments against Esther, to me, are not strong enough to merit its removal from Bible canon. Too many of them are based purely on arguments from silence, and some of them are downright academically dishonest, which gives clear light to a bias. Now, if you understand that this is a story of how God prevails and protects his chosen people from the alliances of enemies, it's not going to be popular with who? The enemies. Who wants to take it out? The enemies. He's talking about us. So someone's going to come against the house of Judah, which is Christ's house, by the way. They're going to form a confederacy or an alliance against that, and they will, in the very end, find destruction. Not popular if you're against Jesus. Not a popular story. The good guys win in this story too. Okay? So, the clear bias, of course, would be if you can identify these people and then still want to take the book of Esther out. Anyway, that's just my take on the book of Esther. So next week we'll be doing a departure from that. We're not going to be doing any more of canonicity or historicity of Esther. We're moving out of Bible books and Bible origins, finally. All right, I don't know what next week looks like. But, tell me what you think about the book of Esther now and whether it belongs in our Bible. And I will say this, to close the book on Esther for myself, years and years and years, centuries of people have been converted and came to believe in the gospel of the kingdom with this Bible that includes the book of Esther. If the book of Esther was that damaging to the kingdom gospel, Jesus would surely have said something about it by now. And yet Jesus says nothing about the book of Esther. He doesn't condemn any of it. That's all we have for today.